everybody. In this video, we are going to start diving into each individual component of our training loop. Now, if you didn't see last week's video or you're not familiar with loopy training, you're gonna wanna go watch that video first and then come back to this one. And I will link to that in the description below. Now remember, in our loop of a training session, we have the cue, the behavior, the marker, and the treat. And it is a cycle where the first cycle ends when the second cycle begins. And so today we're going to talk about the behavior and the marker. And so that's half of our loop. Now, the first thing we're going to talk about is the behavior. And there are a couple of things that are really important when it comes to thinking about your behavior inside of the loop. Now, the first is how you set your criteria, meaning what your dog has to do in order to earn a treat. Now, I am actually just going to read you a little quote out of Don't Shoot the Dog, one of my favorite dog training books of all time. In fact, I got this individual book when I was in 8th grade, I believe. You can see pages are literally falling out. Karen signed it for me. I have actually officially retired this book. So you can see there's her signature. I've actually officially retired this book and I have a new copy now that I've just started rereading. But anyway, I digress. Coming back to the point. The point is criteria setting is extremely important. And I am just going to read you a paragraph, a very short paragraph, out of Don't Shoot the Dog. Now, Karen said that it is important to raise criteria in increments small enough the subject always has a realistic chance of reinforcement. So what that means is that in practice, this means that when you increase demands or raise criteria for reinforcement, you should do so within the range the subject is already achieving. And she continues, she goes on to talk about how setting your criteria has nothing to do with what your dog is capable of doing. It has everything to do with what you're seeing him do now and your ability to communicate your criteria throughout the training session. So you always want to set your criteria well within what your dog is likely to achieve. Okay, we want him to be successful, remember? Now, the next thing to think about when it comes to setting your criteria is that you can only work on one component of a behavior at a time. Now, I don't mean that within a large training session or over the course of a week, you can't work on multiple components. But within a micro training session, so perhaps 10 repetitions within your training session, you can only work on one criteria or one component of the behavior at a time. Because every time you mark, you only get to mark one thing. Now, that's easy when it comes to something like a sit. Your dog's butt hits the ground, you mark and give him a treat. But if we're talking about a more complex behavior, something like heeling, we have lots of components to that. We have how far away is your dog from you laterally? How far ahead of you or behind you is he? At the angle at which he walks, is his butt allowed to stick out and walk like this? And how often does he look up to check in with you? Those are all components of your heeling, and you can only work on one component at a time. So when it comes to thinking about your criteria and your behavior, what it is you're going to mark for is a really important piece of your training session, because you want your criteria to be something that your dog is likely to do, and you want to work on one component at a time. Now, the next thing I want to talk about today is the marker, and there are a couple of things to think about when it comes to your marker. One is the marker itself. What is your marker going to be? Remember, your marker marks the correct behavior and bridges the time gap between when the behavior happens and when the treat arrives. Ideally, it is neutral, it is precise, and it is unique. Now, that is where clickers come in handy, and I don't even have one on me right now. But a clicker is a very precise, very unique, and very neutral tone. Something my voice can never be. My voice will never be neutral, it will never be unique, and it will mostly not be that precise. Now, it can be precise enough for some behaviors, but it's not nearly as precise as a clicker. Now, a short word like yes can be a perfectly good marker if that's all that's available to you, but if you can use a clicker, it's definitely worth the learning curve involved there. So the marker is that piece that marks the correct behavior and bridges the time gap, and your timing with the marker is imperative. You want to mark the moment the behavior is happening, not right before the behavior, not right after the behavior, but the moment the behavior is happening. And actually, if you're struggling in a training session, the very first thing to ask yourself is, what does my timing look like? Am I marking at the right moment? If you're having trouble, get out a video camera, set your phone up on some books, video yourself training. Now, there is one more thing to think about when it comes to using your marker, And that is the fact that your marker is going to cue your dog that reinforcement is now available. So yes, it marks the moment that the behavior happens and it bridges that time gap, but it also tells your dog, hey, your reinforcement is available now. What that means is a couple of things, but importantly is that if your dog is so focused on the food that he can't do anything else, he doesn't really understand that that food isn't available until after you click. And that is why lots of clicker trainers can sit on the floor with their dogs with an open dog bowl sitting next to them, and their dogs don't go for that food because they know that that food is only available after the click. And that's a really important piece to put in your training. Now, next week we're going to start talking about the rest of the loop, primarily the reinforcement, because reinforcement is what drives the entire loop, it drives the entire cycle, it's what pushes your behavior forward, and it's what maintains your behavior once you've taught it. So there's a lot more to the reinforcement piece of the loop than meets the eye, and that's what we're going to start talking about next week. So if you found this video helpful, if you liked it, hit the like button below and share it with your fellow owner trainers. And if you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and that little bell so you get a notification every time we post a new service dog training video. And then if you have any questions at all, throw them in the comments below and I will answer them. And I will see you next week where we're going to dig into reinforcement.